When you say that GR, general relativity, may allow time travel, what's the common misunderstanding of what you're saying? And then what's also the most sophisticated misunderstanding of what you're saying?
um, GR allows for a certain type of time travel. So one common thing that I encounter is that folks want to think of time travel as maybe something that they've seen in a movie or something like that. Going back and changing the past is something that you'll see on a movie like Back to the Future. I grew up with that movie. That's just not something that's going to be compatible with models of GR. What you do find in GR are models that have a peculiar causal structure in the sense that you'll have world lines of particles. This is a trajectory of some massive body that can go forward in time, but the structure of the space-time allows that curve to wrap back on itself, and so the event can be revisited. And that's what's permissible in GR. Curt Gödel in 1949, he presents Einstein with this Gödel solution which allows for time travel. Einstein's response was, that's very interesting. We'll have to see if there are physical reasons to exclude such a model. And I think here we are, many, many decades later, and that's still the position we're in. We're still looking for physical reasons for why we could exclude models like that. And so all sorts of people have proved all sorts of theorems about all sorts of ways in which you can exclude them. But I don't think the situation is one where it's a knockdown argument at any point. There still is a hope, at least by some folks, not necessarily by me, but by some folks, that time travel may be possible. My position is just that we don't know, and I find it fascinating that even a position like that, which is very non-committal and it's very modest, somehow is seen as almost radical or something. So,
If the time traveler isn't a point particle,
yeah,
let's imagine it's a person,
mm-hmm.
then how does that work? Because wouldn't entropy take over and then they would just constantly be increasing in their entropy, or does the entropy reset, or what?
Yeah. I mean, so the model that you'd be looking at is going to be a structure that has the geometry on it, and then via Einstein's equation, you have some matter fields there. And so if you're a person returning to an event that you've previously visited, then yeah, your mass, whatever's going on with your body, that's going to be exactly the same. So, I don't necessarily think in terms of entropy in the sense that it's not some physical thing that I'm modeling there in the space-time, but it certainly is the case that whatever is going on with the matter, it's in a periodic sort of situation. So the matter is coming back around to itself in the same way that a point particle might return back to itself. So yeah.
Your personal data is scattered across the internet like shrapnel. Incogni exists to retrieve it. When we explore consciousness or free will on this show, we engage in cataphatic inquiry, so positively asserting what something is. Data brokers do precisely that to you, asserting your address, your phone number, your social security number, even your relatives' information. These exposed data points are weaponizable. Data breaches increased by 211% from 2023 to 2024. Criminals use your information for identity theft, scams, stalking. You could spend hundreds of hours in a nation drained, exhausted, manually requesting removals from each site. Or Incogni can handle that for you automatically. They contact hundreds of data brokers on your behalf, repeatedly removing data. Their unlimited plan includes custom removals. So send any link where your data appears and they'll take it down. They're the only service independently verified by Deloitte. Just like we have to shed our braggadocious egos to make progress in philosophy and physics, and likewise, it's useful, even vital, to shed your digital traces. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code CURT at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/CURT. They can't harm you if they can't find you. Okay, speaking of coming back around,
Yeah.
earlier you said something about collaborating with Malament or learning from him,
Yeah.
from that legendary, and he still is existing.
Yeah. He lives just down the road here, so I still see him every few weeks. It's lovely. We go on hikes together and things.
Wow, great, great. There are many people whose names you encounter so often in the literature that, at least to me, I think they must no longer be around because they're legends. Roy Baumeister is one of those in psychology. Anyhow, what is it that you learned from Malament about how to do philosophy of physics? And was it something he taught you, or did you just pick it up by osmosis, or you inferred it, or what?
Yeah, I think maybe it was a little bit of both. I mean, I was just watching him, but also he was teaching classes, and he was, in the classroom trying to convey the way he thought about space and time. And I think his distinctive style is one that's very simple in the sense that, he's not one who's drawn to fancy stuff. Really, he is going to focus on making what might be a confusing question, making that precise using the formalism of GR, and then going to work trying to see if that conjecture is true or false, right? So the real genius of someone like David would be to find a way to ask a philosophical question in a very rigorous type way, and then prove a theorem that essentially gives you an answer for that philosophical question.
Give me an example.
Yeah. I think one that is probably the one he may be most known for was one that happened early on in his career when he was a graduate student. Hawking and others had proven that if you give me two models and they have very rich causal structure associated with them, and you tell me that their causal structures are the same in a sense, that there's an isomorphism of the causal structures, that actually the topology is also going to be the same. So you can determine the topology of spacetime via the causal structure of spacetime. So you tell me which points are causally related to which others, and then I will tell you, what the shape of the universe is like. Now, Hawking and others, they had proven this for extremely rich, causally well-behaved spacetimes. What David did was to ask the question: well, how low can you go in terms of the scarcity of causal structure? So I'll give you an example. If you're in a time travel universe where every point is causally related to every other point, you're never going to get a theorem like this to go, because you'll have one model which allows for time travel over here where every point is related to every other. So that's some causal structure. And you can have another over here where maybe it's the same model, but then I yank out some points. So now the topology is all messed up. These are going to have the same causal structure because every point is causally related to every other in both of them. So there's a causal isomorphism. They have the same causal structure, but they have very different topologies. And the beauty of what David did is he said, well, how weak can we go here in terms of what's the minimal level of causal structure that we need to show that causal structure determines the shape of the universe? And so he went to work on that. That was a paper that he published in 1977. Now it's the foundation for a whole program of quantum gravity, the causal set approach to quantum gravity, where the causal set approach says you sprinkle causal, little events in space-time, and there's a causal structure there, and then from that emerges a kind of shape, and so that they depend heavily on a result like David's for that. But that's just one example. He's done it many, many times over the course of his career. Later on in his career, he looked at something like rotation. Rotation in standard Newtonian mechanics is it's very well understood. You ask, well, what does rotation mean in GR? Like, how do you know when object X is rotating around object Y? It turns out there are several things that you might mean by that. And what David did was this is another example of his style. He would say, let me formalize each one of these criteria of of rotation and see if I can't prove either a no-go theorem that says like, hey, these don't really mesh well with one another. You can find spacetimes that's where it's, an object is rotating around another one according to criterion A, but not according to criterion B. Or try to prove a uniqueness theorem that shows that these all come together. And it turned out that after he really looked and investigated this problem, they came apart. And so now we know that in NGR, rotation is a very tricky, subtle business. And it's David who has been able to identify both the problem there and then show how going to work and formalizing this philosophical question, this philosophical problem, leads to a clear answer. So there's clarity, there's light. Now we understand it better, and so those are a couple of examples.
Yes, and David collaborated with Hogarth to come up with the Malament-Hogarth, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
Spacetimes. I have an article about that as well. I don't know how to pronounce I said it sounds like a Yu-Gi-Oh card.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that is David never published anything about Malament-Hogarth spacetimes. I don't know the whole story there, but David was in correspondence with John Ehrman and some others about this possibility. So it's David's idea. But the first person to publish a paper about this was Hogarth. And so as a kind of compromise, I think John Ehrman said, let's call these things Malament-Hogarth spacetimes, but it's David's idea. And the main theorems, including the theorem that Malament-Hogarth spacetimes are necessarily not globally hyperbolic, that's also David.